Want to preface my experience by telling you about two earlier NDEs I had as a child, and to explain the events of my childhood that led up to my main NDE story. I grew up in an abusive home. My father was violent. His favorite thing to do to me was to volley my head between his fists and throw me into walls. He had also threatened to shoot me and my sister. Once he pointed a gun at my sister's head while she cried and begged for her life. She suffered from traumatic head injuries and was treated for these after she left home and went away to college. The first NDE I had was when I was 9 years old. I have no memory of what caused the NDE, but I suspect it had been caused by something my father had done to me because my body was in the backyard. Our backyard was surrounded by thick, tall hedges, so the neighbors couldn't see what was going on. What I do remember so clearly is that I was floating around the backyard feeling happier than I had ever felt. I was enjoying my out-of-body state without realizing that I was dead or could die. I don't remember a tunnel, but I did experience a bright light above me. I was instantly in a state of bliss and knew that this light was God. God spoke to me telepathically, but it was very clearly not my own thoughts. I was told that I was there to do something for God, and was asked if I wanted to continue with what it was that I was supposed to do. I felt intense joy and fealty at the thought of being able to do something that would please God, whatever that was. I didn't seem to care what was asked of me because I was eager to do anything for God. I quickly said yes, not realizing that the choice was between dying or continuing my life, although I don't think it would have mattered to me because I was all in. God then told me that I needed to be baptized. I needed to go get my dad and tell him that I wanted to be baptized and to ask him to come and witness my baptism. The light left me, and I was back in my body. I was disappointed to no longer have that feeling that was so wonderful and free. I was happy to get on with what I had to do for God. At the time, I believed that my purpose was limited to getting baptized, but I think that was because of my age and lack of understanding. I should explain that my family had attended church together until my parents were kicked out the church for reasons unknown to me. I loved church and continued to go without my parents. I went inside the house and called out to my father, who was in the basement. I said I needed to talk to him. He asked me to go and wait for him in the backyard. He came out and sat on the back steps. I told him that I wanted to be baptized and to have him present to witness it. He asked me why I wanted to be baptized. I told him that I wanted to serve God. He then asked me if the church had put me up to this. I told him, no, I just saw God, and God himself had just now told me that he wanted me to get baptized. My dad looked freaked out. He told me that he would talk to the preacher and ask permission to be able to be present at my baptism. He told me not to tell my mother that God had spoken to me or she would be greatly concerned. I'm not sure why I was told to get baptized, because I believe this to be a religious ritual that has no bearing on what happens when I die. I think it was an attempt to make it clear to my father that he had killed me, although I don't even remember if he did, and that there is a God. Perhaps it was an attempt to get him to think about what he was doing, although it didn't stop the violence. Nevertheless, at age 9, I was the youngest person ever to be baptized in that church. My parents were there in attendance even though they never again stepped foot in the church. The second experience happened when I was a young child, but I don't remember my age. It could have happened prior to the NDE that happened when I was 9. I remember feeling really sick. I was lying on the couch in the living room. I soon began to feel even worse and had the strange experience of hallucinating numbers. This experience was so bizarre that I really don't know how to explain it. There were equations scrolling in front of me, and as they scrolled, I suddenly understood mathematics that were way beyond me. It was like I intuitively knew all this math, which was especially weird because I was really bad at math. I knew what the equations were even though I was too young to have understood them at the time. This scared me because I knew this wasn't right, and I didn't want to have all this math in my head. I decided I needed to go get my mom and tell her that I was super sick and something was very wrong with me. Mom was in the kitchen sitting in a chair, staring into space, looking like she was deep in thought. I tried to communicate to her, but it was as if she didn't hear me or know I was there. I finally gave up trying to get her attention and went back to the couch where I was confused for a moment to see myself already lying there. At the time, I chalked it all up to being so sick that I was seeing things rather than understanding that I had been out of my body. As the years passed, I became mad at God. As a teenager, I couldn't understand why a loving God would allow me to be abused. I tried so hard to be good, this made no sense to me. When I was age 16, my dad picked me up from church and got mad at me over something I had said to him. He punched me so hard in the stomach that it knocked the air out of me. As I struggled to catch my breath, he told me that he hated me and had thought about killing me, but was worried he'd get caught by the police. I entered a deep depression after that moment. I wished that he had killed me because it would have been better than living my awful life. I thought that I must be really unlovable and unworthy if even my own father hated me so much that he wished me dead. I decided that even if it was true that killing myself meant I would go to hell, I couldn't imagine hell being any worse than what I was living. I was willing to risk that. I proceeded to try various methods of killing myself, none of which worked. I loved to read. It was a wonderful escape from my reality into a different, albeit fictional one. My mother also liked to read. Every time she finished a book, she placed it on a stack of books that she kept against the wall in her bedroom. I read every book that she read when she was finished with it. One day I said a prayer that was very fervent and deeply emotional. I had basically only been praying for death. Then I did die. I had a sudden, incredibly intense pain in the back of my head. I don't mean that I had an ordinary headache or even a migraine. No, this was the mother of all headaches. It was so painful that I was convinced that God was granting my wish, but that I was going to die by my head exploding. It really did feel like there was a ton of pressure in my head, and it was just going to explode. In later years, I discussed this with my neurologist, who said it sounded like I had a burst aneurysm in my brain. If this is in fact what happened, it isn't so far-fetched to think I could have had one at age 16, since head trauma is one of the things that can cause them. Also, I was so upset at that moment, my blood pressure had probably risen. The other weird thing was that I felt these areas of energy activate in a straight line up my body. I could feel them activate one at a time, from the groin area and all the way up to the top of my head. I had no idea what chakras were and was surprised to learn about them later. The energy was especially strong at my throat. By the time I felt the point of energy activate at the top of my head, the pain was suddenly gone. I was out of my body, floating upwards. I now found myself in an utterly black void. I was confused. I didn't imagine death to be a situation where you maintained your consciousness but existed in nothingness. I wondered if perhaps my eyes just needed time to adjust to the lack of light. So I squinted into the blackness to see if there was anything there at all. I thought to myself, surely there is something here. Instantly, I saw various geometrical shapes floating towards me on a grid. I have since read other people say that they learned from their NDE that who or what you see is based on what you expect, so that you are comforted. So I suppose I experienced a void until I thought that there should be something, in which case I got unspecific shapes because something isn't a very specific thought. Next, I thought, where is God? I had believed that I would meet God when I died. At this thought, my consciousness began to expand until it encompassed the entire universe. I was filled with the most amazing, unconditional love, and I knew that this love was God. It was a feeling and a love that is unlike anything you experience in life, and I am unable to describe it in any way that does it justice. It was pure bliss. I was all at once, everywhere and a part of everything in existence. I was filled with all the knowledge that existed and knew everything there was to know. I was so loved. I then found myself in a place that looked like a cave that was filled with light. In this cave, I hid behind a wall and peered around the corner at what looked like the stereotypical gray alien with the big black eyes. I don't know if this was really an alien being or if she appeared as an alien because that was my expectation. I wasn't hiding because I was afraid of the alien, but because I knew I wasn't supposed to be there. I was supposed to be living my life on Earth. The alien spoke to me telepathically and asked me if I was going to come out of hiding. Since she knew I was there, I stepped out to talk to her. I really don't know if the alien had a gender. I'm just calling it a her. I was stunned by how beautiful she was. She had an alien body, but her body was made of light. It looked something like an aurora borealis because her body was a moving light of a color that didn't exist on Earth. I knew humans could be horribly fearful and violent. I didn't sense that the alien was afraid of me, but I told her not to worry and that I wasn't going to hurt her because I was a nice human. She was trying to get me to pay attention to what looked like a flat-screen television on the wall of the cave. This was before flat-screen TVs were invented. It had scenes from my life playing on it, but I didn't want to take my eyes off of her because she was so beautiful, and it's not every day that you get to meet an alien. I said to her, "Why do you keep trying to get me to look at that? I'm not interested in that. I already know about my life. I'm interested in you. You are so beautiful." I then asked if I could look into her eyes, which she allowed, but there was only blackness there. On the TV screen was a scene of me and my friends rehearsing the high school musical that I had a lead role in. I realized that if I died, the musical would be canceled. I had about 7 solos or duets in that musical and no understudy. Theater and books were the only things that gave me joy in life, and I couldn't take that joy away from the drama kids at school. As soon as I realized that I didn't want to hurt the kids at school by dying, I went flying backward at a high rate of speed to make a harsh landing into my body. I promptly ran to the bathroom and vomited. When I came back, I retained an understanding of what I needed to do going forward. I needed to love my father unconditionally, the way I had been unconditionally loved in my NDE. I knew that my dad was hateful and violent because he felt unloved, and that when people feel unloved, that emptiness inside of them sometimes causes them to take their pain out on others. The problems we have in our world are caused by a lack of love for one another, and they are solved by loving each other unconditionally, having compassion instead of judging them. Even though I was a victim, I had also hated my father. I had gained the understanding that there is good in everyone. We just have to look for it. After 2 weeks of thinking about it, I finally came up with something about my dad that was good. My dad loved plants. He was horrible to people, but he gave a lot of care to cultivating our yard. In fact, we had the nicest yard in the neighborhood. We had flower beds, rose bushes, flowering trees, fruit trees, hedges, and so on. My father actually loved and cared for something. Every time he yelled at me, I ignored the horrible things he was saying to me and repeatedly thought, "You are a really great gardener," while projecting love to him. What I mean by projecting love is that I imagined love to be like a light or energy that expanded from my body when I had loving thoughts, and that this love would fill him. When I did this, it stopped him in his tracks even though I wasn't saying anything out loud. I did, however, remind him at other times that he was a good gardener and that we had the best yard in the neighborhood in order to remind him of the side of himself that was caring. He stopped being abusive and one day told me that he felt like I was the only person in the world who loved him. I had never actually said to him that I loved him, and yet my efforts to love him were affecting him. My sister hates our father and cringed when I told her about my NDE and what I had learned about needing to love him unconditionally. She told me that she thought I had Stockholm Syndrome. I know that this is a really hard thing for people to take in. It is really hard to love someone who has been cruel to you, but it helps to think of it as finding the good in them. That's where you start. You start by loving the goodness in people. It doesn't mean that you love the bad stuff, but that you have compassion for others by understanding that what causes people to be horrible to others is that they feel unloved themselves. Some people would say this doesn't hold for narcissists, but my dad is narcissistic, and I truly believe it is an overcompensation for a deeply held fear of inadequacy. At age 16, I never told anyone about what had happened to me and never went to a doctor to get checked out because I was sure that if I mentioned my experience to people, they would think that I was crazy. Still to this day, I feel reluctant to talk about it because I realize that not only do many people respond with skepticism to near-death experiences, but that mine has some strangely unique elements to it that would make me sound even crazier. I have many people in my life who are into science and think of NDEs as chemical reactions in a dying brain. What I experienced, however, was more real than what we think of as reality. It also changed my life profoundly. The important part of the after effects were not how my body felt or whether or not I had developed abilities, but how different I became as a person.